Good morning, it's Joyful Christian Hermit, trying to avoid a gut attack if I can or ward it off. And the dogs are so good, they can tell when I'm having trouble. They came over to me, and Lovey put his head in my lap, and they had to go out. They really had to go out after breakfast, and they made it very fast. Came in, are very good and quiet. They're just such good dogs. I'm so grateful for them. But I'm now thinking maybe it's heat and weather switch, barometric pressure shift. Maybe that's something to do with the pressure on nerves in the body. Damaged nerves. My spine nerves are very damaged. They're like they get clumped together like overcooked spaghetti or something. Was a description I had read once of arachnoiditis, and what I saw were just all these little dots that represented the nerves going up through, all clumped together. And then he showed me the normal cross section of the spine, and they're evenly spaced throughout with space between our nerves. So the clumping then causes abnormal signals to the body, obviously, which causes then the pain. And it can I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't think anyone does really too much as to why or how it sends out. There's no rhyme nor reason to where the signals are sent out into the body. It can be anywhere, but there are typically areas like if you don't keep pushing yourself and keep mobile, then you end up paralyzed. But you still have pain. So at first I thought, I'd like to be paralyzed and you wouldn't feel it. I would trade that. I'd sit in a wheelchair, but I wouldn't feel pain. Oh no, I was told no. And it's true, I would just have these signals going off like in my gut, like today, and be horribly sick, but wouldn't be able to move, to stand up, to do what I needed to do. I'd have to have constant care. So no, I quickly got off that idea of thinking that would be so good. But there was a comment this morning. It's obviously in response to my talking about the pain and not feeling well. But it's interesting. It's not quite a platitude. Maybe it's more just perfunctory. It's this person seems like, oh, that sounds wise. Isn't that a wise statement? But it's obvious. It's just so obvious. Nothing is impossible for Yahweh. And that in itself, some people are starting to refer to God or Jesus as Yahweh, especially God. They'll use the word Yahweh. And I don't know if they are anti-Semitic, if they're anti-Israel. It's very offensive to Jewish people. That's why Christians generally never say Yahweh. They don't refer to God as Yahweh. In the Old Testament, it's listed as, and it's generally, in an accurate translation, just 4 letters that represent. It's the name for God that is to be unspoken. It is disrespectful to speak that particular title that God gives himself, even though it's in print. The Jewish people, it's in the Old Testament, the Jewish people do never speak it. And those who do are offending another religion. So I don't think it's a good thing to this trend. I've seen it before. And Jesus never referred to himself as that, and he never spoke it. He never used that word. And I think we should follow what Jesus does. Anyway, It says here, nothing is impossible. I'm going to say for God, because that's the scripture. Nothing is impossible for God. And there are no incurable diseases, only incurable patients. Well, yes, if nothing is impossible for God, but we are assuming that God wants to cure all ailments. And God doesn't choose to cure all ailments. That's an errant thinking. And it's one that can become rather sort of sarcastic or superior sounding. People, well, you just don't have enough faith. You're an incurable patient. It's not an incurable disease because God can cure anything. Well, he can, but he chooses not. And so far in history, God has never cured arachnoiditis in anyone. God has never cured those with terrible spinal cord injuries. He's chosen that. And whether, I don't know if God chooses the person that he wants to have suffering for different reasons, because remember, love and suffering are intertwined. It's not a dishonor to suffer. It's not a horrible thing. It actually teaches people a great deal, suffering does. And it teaches the person who suffers, and it teaches all those around the person who suffers. So God utilizes suffering for great good. Obviously, look at Jesus. Was Jesus an incurable person? Was it a mistake? Because God could have prevented his only son being crucified. He could have stopped all that. So did that make Jesus an incurable person? An uncooperative person? And all those people, they were hell-bent on killing him. What did it make them? So this is a sort of a platitude or a perfunctory statement of it sounds so wise and so right, but it's not. It's obvious, it's basic, but the person's missing the point of God. God chooses. God doesn't choose to cure all, does he? If all things are possible with God, then we all could live forever, when we do see. But people could interpret it, well, then why does anyone die? Why does a child die? Why did that child die? Did that child choose to die? Was that an incurable patient, that little child who had cancer? The baby who had cancer and died? Was that an incurable patient? Or was God, because God, nothing's impossible to God. See, it's a very kind of a narrowed, not very enlightened viewpoint, not understanding God. And God chooses. There are reasons why babies die. Tangible, logical, and temporal, but also spiritual reasons. And it was a religious sister. I have the pamphlet upstairs. Should have gotten it. I mean, I can't go upstairs. But it's a woman came back from heaven or from purgatory. something to that effect. And she explained to one of the religious sisters, who was one of her roommates, and she explained to her roommate in the convent, and was explaining why people die. She had different understanding because she had already died. She came back in visions and locutions to this other religious sister and explained how some people die when they're young for different reasons. And I'll have to get my wits about me to explain this. But God has reasons. She was explaining from the other side about death. And some people who are young die, their souls are pure. They progress in life very rapidly, and they're very pure and innocent, like children. And God allows them to die. For one thing, their learning on earth was over. They had proceeded in purity quickly, enlightened souls. But also, God needed to shake up things in the family around, or in situations around the person. I use my cousin Philip as an example. He was 18, and he had become just very sweet in his cancer. And he died about a year later. It was maybe about 11 months before it was found. He died from cancer. And of course, they tried everything, to have him live. He went through all kinds of, back in 1969, a lot of treatments that were experimental back then. And they didn't work for him. But come to find out, his dad had been living with someone else, a young woman, while still married. He was like an adulterer, but a bigamist. He was like a bigamist. He had this other woman with children who called him dad. And his wife, my aunt, knew nothing of it. And in the meantime, then my cousin passed, and my uncle didn't sign for insurance, didn't help pay for funeral. It was really quite horrendous, He was really in a wrong lane. My uncle was. And after my cousin died, a couple of months later, this woman calls my aunt and says, "Why won't you let so-and-so get a divorce, have a divorce?" And she didn't know anything about this woman. And this woman had 2 little children. But my children call him daddy, Well, my aunt, and my cousin was her youngest child. The other one was, I think, toward the end of college. And Philip passed, and here's this phone call from this woman, young woman, not much older than my girl cousin, Philip's older sister, a couple of years older or something, maybe 3 years. And my aunt said, "Well, I didn't know he wanted a divorce, but he certainly has one now," when the woman explained how he'd been living with her and as a husband. They weren't married, but as if. "My little girls call him daddy," and it had been going on all through my Philip's illness, all through that time period. And I remember my mother telling me, and I said, "Oh, good, good." My mother looked at me like, "What?" I was 5 days younger than Philip. And I said, "Yes, I'm so glad." I said, I have never felt right about him, about my uncle, and I had reason. I never felt right about him. From when I was even a preschooler, gave me the vibes. And he did something once that was not right. And when I was maybe in second grade or first grade, and this thick look on his face, very inappropriate. And I never trusted him. So, and sad. But he later turned himself around, and this woman. They became alcoholics, this young woman with him. But then later on, they had a conversion and got very involved with Christ and church and turned their lives around and apologized to my aunt. It was years later, she had remarried a man who was very, just adored her. And her first husband had gotten into trouble not once, 2 or 3 times with his jobs. And in one time he was selling an insurance and had embezzled money. He liked to live beyond his means. And she had no clue. But to save him from prison, she went back. She went to college, got a degree, and started teaching, and promised this insurance company she would pay it back. And he would help too. But he went on, I think he did, then he got involved with this young woman. He was an insurance salesman. That's how he met her. In selling insurance to her parents. She was very young and had 2 little children and wasn't married, and was there with her, living with her parents, and that's how they met. And but at least he changed, he turned around. And he was shaken by his son's death. I will say that. But not enough. But it was a start to get him turned around. So that's an example. If God will use a person's death, to cause a living person's salvation, to get them to change, or they'd otherwise be condemned to hell. Had he not changed later, he would, and he's dead now. He died. He got cancer. Maybe he was 76 when he died. And my aunt's still living. She'll be 102 in about a week, 10 days. June 8th. And suffering a great deal now, too. She's aware, but sleeps a lot and hurts and just tired. Doesn't have any cancer, anything wrong. But it's hard just being in bed. And can't see, it's hard. Very hard. But, and then other reasons is because that they die is because they are so pure, their purpose on earth is no longer needed. So they're allowed to leave. Or they've arrived, they've learned all they're going to learn, and God is satisfied and takes them from this earth. Very holy souls. You'll hear people talk about even some child. The child was an old soul. The child was so pure, or teen or something, or even young adult, or younger than normal for death, not an old person. Then those are a couple of reasons. Another reason is that they're doing something, they're so bad that God is needing to take them before people are praying for the person, but they're not changing. And God will pluck them out to save them because of all those who love the person and pray. That's why it's always important to pray for people who are doing wrong. So that, if they're on the verge of doing something that will condemn them to hell, then God will at least have mercy and take them from this earth before they do. And then they still have a chance for progression and to right their wrongs on the other side in purgatory. So I found that very interesting. And I can get the pamphlet. It was a religious order connected with the Virgin Mary. And one of the nuns had died, and she came back to her good friend, another sister, and revealed all these things, was told God wanted her to come back, and she was to write it all down. So I thought that was interesting. Well, I have to go. I'm getting a little ill, so I got to go. God bless you all. I'll be back. I want to read a sermon. And I have a correction. That other one that I read wasn't from Leo the Great. It was Gregory the Great in a previous video. Oh, here. So out of them not turning this off. Got to turn it off here.